Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IOCDF's live stream, our virtual programming. Today, we are going to have a special guest who you see on the screen, John Hirschfield. So, John, you are technically, for Liz and I, you are our last guest of 2023 because we're
Oh,
not
wow.
having you next Wednesday because of the holidays. So you're like crowned, like the bookend. I don't remember who our first was. I didn't look it up. I should have. But you are our like final treat of 2023. Welcome.
Nice. And end the year on a vaguely uncomfortable note.
No, it's so great to have you. You're such a friend of the show. Liz and I always enjoy having you on. Everybody else always enjoys having you on. We get a lot of good feedback and stuff. So I'm just excited to have you here. Real quick, before I announce what we're going to be discussing today, a couple things. First of all, Liz will be here. As you know, both Liz and John run really successful OCD higher care treatment programs. So as you know, it's always unpredictable, right? So she'll be on in any second. But we always want to start with the reminders that this live stream is not intended to replace therapy. So for treatment related questions, please work with your provider or contact a local clinician. You can use the IOCDF's online resource directory at iocdf.org/find-help to locate a trained clinician near you. The IOCDF is not a crisis hotline. If you are in a crisis or you are ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room or call 911 or the 988 Suicide and Crisis Hotline by dialing 988 or going to 988lifeline.org. And then finally, we want to create a safe space and be kind and respectful to everyone. So at the end of the day, we're all here to support one another. And a note that this is being broadcast on several social media platforms and being recorded. But back to my guest. So John Hirschfield is an author. I want to definitely put that out there. It's your recent book, right? Or did you already write another book?
Since our last conversation. My most recent book is the Unwanted Thoughts and Intense Emotions workbook, which I co-wrote.
Okay, yes. Okay. So I have that one. I just want to make sure there wasn't one since I last saw you. But what I really like about this book, so make sure to check out his books. He has a bunch of ones. We talk about his family one at our family group a lot, but a lot of people deal with intense emotions. So a lot of really good OCD specific literature. He also runs the OCD Anxiety Treatment Center at Shepherd Pratt. Remind me the state. I'm so bad with states.
We're in Maryland.
Maryland. Okay. Baltimore is the capital, right? So Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to like do association.
Baltimore is the famous city. Yes.
Yeah. I always have to do like an association. So he runs a really successful and really helpful treatment center out there. But he's also been in the OCD field for a while. We used to have him in California. He moved away from us, but just an all-around good guy. Other than your introduction I gave you, is there anything I missed or anything you're excited about that you want to share with everyone viewing or the people who will watch this back?
Excited to learn that I'm an all-around good guy. This is news to me. I'm very pleased to hear it. No, I'm it's the exciting time of year. I mean, it's a challenging time of year for many people, but it's also festive and fun time of year for many people. So I think it's really cool that I get to be on your show today, during the festive season. And, we put a lot of stock in, January 1st is coming around, and then I'm going to go on a diet, and then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to be a better person and all this stuff. And there's something, I don't know, something I find really interesting about that, because I fall victim to it as well, where it's like, what's the point? I'll wait for the new year to start taking good care of myself or start treating myself compassionately. And every once in a while, I'll remember, but like nothing really happens between December 31st and January 1st. It's literally another day. It's the definition of a construct. It's a calendar. It's all made up. And yet there's something that we need. We set these markers of like, then I'll be better, or then I'll take good care of myself. So I try to remember around this time of year when the pressure is on in that way, to just take moments throughout the day to just be okay now. Right? To just treat yourself with compassion now, to take care of your OCD now, to stop judging yourself now, knowing that there's a lot of pressure to kind of not be okay now.
Well said. And I don't know if you see this, obviously a lot of our clients come with, experience depression as well. But I say even with OCD, I mean, having these disorders, one of the common things that I see amongst all clients, regardless of subtype or how OCD manifests, is a really internal harshness. And I'm glad you said just what you said, is because, I run support groups and we've been talking a lot about depression. Actually, our first episode back in 2 weeks will be about depression. But a lot of times that self harshness or that critical or that judgment, I have friends, I have family, and sure, I hear it there. But with my clients, I mean, it's really, really loud. Do you see that in clients with OCD, maybe co-morbid depression or anxiety? Just a lot of like self judgment or harshness, or sometimes I always say like your inner dialogue is always kind of fixating on the negative or what's going wrong versus seeing the situation more whole. I don't know if you experience that with your clients or it's just a California thing.
I think it's just a regular part of the human condition, and like a lot of things, people with OCD have a tendency to turn it into an art form. Where the self judgment is not just something that's arising in consciousness, and you can note it. Oh, there's judgment, whatever. But that it has a tendency to pull you out of the moment and task you with like, now figure it out. Is the judgment correct, and how correct is it? And if it's correct, what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to fix it? And how are you going to keep yourself from being judged again? And puts all this pressure on you to be certain about the experience instead of just being an observer of the experience. You'll have to forgive me. I just came out of a 5-day silent meditation retreat, so everything I'm going to say today is going to be very Buddhist oriented.
No, I love it. And I think there's such I wasn't going to mention unless you did, but if you wanted to share a little bit, you can. Because what I found, I did martial arts, and that's really like after my treatment, I got into martial arts, and my studio was very into mindfulness, very into like, obviously like Eastern philosophies. And when people ask me about my own personal recovery, they're always like, is there anything else that you would suggest? And I said, look, the two things I did that I think really helped heal me is one, I came from a very traumatic household, and I went and dealt with the trauma and kind of just like general working through things. But the other thing is I went into martial arts, and I was really introduced into this concept of mindfulness, of presence, of letting things go, of peace, of, a kind of objective or silent observer. And for me personally, that was really good for my recovery, because I always realized that OCD didn't really live in the moment with me. It was always like, hey, you did this horrific thing in the past, you should probably think about now, or this horrible thing is going to happen. But when I'd be in the dojo and he'd have us kind of just like focus on the here, the present moment, I was always just like, nothing's happening. Like I couldn't call 911 right now about what's happening right now because I'm just at a dojo. My brain is telling me these horrific things will happen. And if it does, I'll have to call 911 and deal with it then. So, you wrote a book obviously on mindfulness. How do you see mindfulness or presence kind of correlating with kind of sort of individuals with OCD? Why should somebody maybe explore that if that could potentially be helpful in their recovery?
Well, I heard some very interesting things on retreat this time that kind of stuck with me. And one was this idea of, we go to the phone or the internet for the news or the weather. And on this retreat, without our phones and silent meditation, we're going to be going inside. What's the news inside? What's the weather inside? And there's this whole emphasis on research and the mind being a lab, and you actually just sort of looking at what comes up, right? And this is not ruminating, this is not analysis, this is not figuring it out. This is just observing, what arises when you just look inside, right? You have 6 things. You have your 5 senses and what they call mind objects or mental objects or, creations of the mind, all these stories. One of those stories is judgment. I think when we talk about judgment, we tend to talk about it like judgment bad. If you see judgment, stop it. It's very bad. You shouldn't judge yourself. And then those of us with OCD are not just judging ourselves, but are judging ourselves for judging ourselves. And it becomes this Inception movie where you go inside.
Exactly. I call it a feedback loop.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
You judge yourself for judging yourself for judging yourself.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon you're in such a loop.
Yeah, but self-judgment's normal. It's part of the human condition. Of course it's there, right? And then the question is, when it's there, what is a healthy or skillful way to respond to it? Well, a good start would simply just notice it and be aware that is there. There is judgment, right? So when you're sitting there in your dojo and you're tasked with being present in the moment, one of the things that might come up is like, I'm not doing this right, or I really need to be thinking about this other thing, or when I'm finished with this martial arts training, I have to make sure I go and email that person this thing and whatever, right? And those things are they're just arising, and you're noticing that they're there, but those are mental objects, right? They're part of the present. There's nothing to analyze or figure out or do. Your job is to simply notice and be there with it. I think the implications there for OCD, particularly for exposure therapy, are so important. When we talk about facing our fears, And a lot of times, when people talk about ERP in a negative light, about it being like torturous or bad or pressure or something like that, what gets missed in that dialogue is the idea that all of that intensity is already there, right? And what we're doing when we do exposure therapy is we're just practicing, can we be with it? Can we be in the space with it and not be so reactive? And discover, is there something to learn there when I'm feeling dirty, or when I'm feeling triggered, or when I'm feeling in the presence of a taboo thought, by not reacting with my compulsions? Is there something that it's like to be with that? Maybe it's very unpleasant. Maybe it's very painful to be separate from what you want, or to be in the presence of aversion. But can you allow yourself to make space for that, to actually be with that? I think that that's the secret sauce to exposure therapy, is like going into those spaces and realizing it's not about, oh, I've proven that I'm safe or something like that, but just recognizing that, like, yeah, that can also arise. And in that moment, I can make a decision to ruminate, to wash my hands, to avoid, or to simply notice, and then get back to what I was really caring about in the first place, which, in your story, is the martial arts, but could be anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I went to a training once on mindfulness. It wasn't specifically for OCD, but one of the things that he said is, what I really, really appreciated is he's saying, look, like, your mind is an observer. So there is always going to be judgment. You can't just turn it off, but you can start to look at some of those judgments as suggestions, right? So maybe you're looking at going, you're a college student and you're thinking about studying abroad, and your brain is coming up with the reasons why that might be too difficult. Those are just suggestions. Do you want to take on the challenge? Do you see value in traveling and going to school abroad? Sure, there'll be some challenges, but I think with OCD, we don't look at those challenges as like opportunities for growth, or to like pride ourselves in like pushing through. Because I think with people who don't have OCD, there's challenges as well, but they're like, oh, this is going to be fun, I'll overcome it. In the OCD mind, it's like, as soon as we see a challenge, we back off. And so I'll talk to clients sometimes like, yeah, that is a potential challenge. If you do choose to go with your family to the zoo, there might be contaminants. I haven't been to a zoo in forever, but I can't promise there will or there won't. But like, what if you could handle that? And the other thing he was talking about that I talk to my clients about is like, feelings and emotions are temporary experiences. We can't remember some emotion we felt from something that happened in 2011, and we're still feeling it all these days later. The ebbs and flows, 1 hour you could be feeling one way and something new. And so I think a lot of people with OCD, like you were saying, is like, when they're in that moment, challenging something that's hard, is there any like negative emotions that pop up? We all, I have OCD too, we misread that as, this must be dangerous, versus like, okay, this is an experience I'm having. What if I just wait it out? What if I just keep moving forward? And what I found in my own recovery is, typically the more I did that, the shorter that period lasted. And I started to learn that just because something was causing initial uneasiness, I don't read that anymore as that means dangerous. Especially if everybody else around me is chilling and having a great time, right? Nobody else is like running into danger that is going to harm them. So if I'm at the zoo and I have contamination fears and I see people feeding the different animals, it's like, my brain's telling me it's dangerous, and I can observe that, but I don't have to then do what my brain is asking me. So I just love just the power of mindfulness. I think it's such an asset if people really are into it.
Yeah, well, you raised some really good points there. I think one of the things you kind of touched on was this illusion of reliability. So we have this feeling of fear or disgust or shame, and we become conditioned to think that until I do the compulsion, this feeling will stay exactly the way it is, which is to say intolerable, until the end of time. And what's amazing about feelings and thoughts and our bodies and everything is that they're fantastically unreliable, right? Everything changes. But we get confused in that moment from the OCD. And again, people without OCD have this problem as well, but people with OCD, get it in very concentrated ways, into thinking that until I've done the compulsion, then I'm not going to be clean. So they view things like what you described as suggestions, really more as like, problems to solve, contaminants, to be removed, instead of just like, oh, there's an idea. Right? And whether that's a good idea or bad idea will kind of pan out eventually. But no, I need to figure it out now, because if I don't figure it out now, it will remain a thorn in my side until the end of time.
Yeah, the other thing I talk to clients about is like that initial I need to find out, right? So let's say in your analogy or your example, like somebody gets dirty and they need to figure it out right now. The problem is the mindset, the headspace that we're in to try to figure it out is the worst. Like when we're initially triggered and we're at that peak anxiety. And I always ask clients, I said, would you want your pilot to fly in this mind state? Would you want your Uber driver to drive? Would you want your surgeon to operate in this mind space? And the answer is uniformly no. And I say, okay, you're about to make a decision whether you might have, ran somebody over or you have disconnected your relationship with God. Like those are life-changing decisions. And you're making it in a mind state that you would not even want your Uber driver to drive in. So what if we didn't answer this right now? What if we let that question kind of hang out there? There's plenty of questions in life, like how does gravity work? I still don't know how a plane flies, that you don't feel compelled to answer. You feel compelled to answer this one because there's the OCD machine behind it. But what if you just hung out and didn't answer that? And let's see what happens. And while that's happening, what if you teach yourself you can coexist with anxiety? So you can still go to the baseball game you have tickets for. And what clients will always say is like by the time they kind of get engaged and get moving on and their anxiety sort of comes down and their like rational mind sort of pokes through, they start to realize like, wow, it felt so compelling an hour ago, but right now I don't even care enough to make the decision. And over time, people start to learn that urgency isn't because something's really urgent, it's because OCD demands your full attention. And just like in real life, you don't have to always give your attention to things you don't want to give your attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and there are people with OCD who feel compelled to answer all of the questions all of the time, right? So not just the question about the plane, but also the question about how does, paper get manufactured, or like whatever question comes up, this sort of burden to figure it out instead of just noticing, there's a question. I, I have to wonder how many people in the audience, I think you probably weren't aware that at some point your thumb was up and there's this new annoying kind of zoom
Yes,
where it showed the thumb. It was right after you said hit someone with your car. And then there was this cute little bubble of like, yay, hitting people with their
I
car.
know. I saw that. I was like, oh my God. I didn't know if it was only on my screen. So I wasn't going to say it and then seem crazy. But
Well, it was your secret wish that people get
right. I'm like, yes,
being
please.
presented. Yeah. So yeah,
What I
no,
wanted
I
to
agree with all of that.
What I wanted to ask you, John, is what I really wanted to talk about a little bit before we jump into questions is like you've been working in this field and helping people with OCD. And I think that I don't know if you feel this way, but every client has their own unique strengths. But there are certain things that I see clients do that are often found more successful. So I did a talk last Wednesday and people were asking me like what some of the things that I did. And one of the things that I see in clients that are very successful is there's this like kind of like mindset shift of where they're like, look, I recognize like where I'm at is not working. This isn't working for me. Now, I'm not ready to jump all in, but that first initial shift of like, hey, this isn't working for me. I'm coming to therapy. I'm ready to make a change. And not only that, I'm really want to prioritize this. There's a lot of things that are important to me. Maybe I have a family, maybe I have a job, but right now my mental health kind of has to take precedence because all of this will be better once that platform is kind of secured. So when I was going through, I did a presentation. It was like 15 items. One of the ones that I started with is just, I get that everybody has a lot going on in your life. You have to find time to be consistent with pushing back against the OCD. Some people like to set time aside. Some people like to do the exposures more so just part of everyday life. But OCD treatment can't be this thing that you do every time you see your therapist and then you forget about it all week. So for you, what are some of the things that maybe you see that are really assets that if people watching are like, hey, how do I really supercharge my treatment and be more successful? What are some of the main things that you sort of see in your clients that end up being more successful?
I think that, well, in mindfulness circles, we talk about the two wings of the bird, which is, mindfulness is one wing and compassion is the other. And without one, the bird can't take off. And I like the idea that without one, the bird just kind of walks around in a circle, like, just the obsessive mind, right? So I think the first thing that comes to mind is self-compassion. And if you can't access self-compassion, then practicing compassion towards others, towards animals, towards anything that's in front of you, right? You might notice things about people in your life that annoy you and you don't like that they're this way or that way. And I'm not talking about people that are abusive towards you. I mean, people who are, wearing the wrong socks with their shoes or whatever. And you might notice like, yeah, what's with that person being that way? To just get in the practice of just decide to love that person anyway, right? Like, how cool is it that that person wore those socks? I'll give you an example. Actually, when I was on retreat, the person sitting behind me was clearing their throat a lot. And I don't know, maybe it was a tick or a compulsion, or maybe they were kind of cold, but it was this like thing that would happen like, random intervals in the midst of all of this silence. And my initial reaction when I got there was like, oh man, I got to move seats, or it doesn't matter, I'm going to hear wherever I am, or this is so annoying. And at some point I shifted and I just decided I was going to love this guy. And it turns out the noise he was making was a very effective reminder to get me out of rumination. That'd be like thinking about work or something, and then I'd hear that sound and be like, oh wait, no, I'm supposed to be meditating. I felt this immense gratitude for this person who'd done nothing wrong, right? But I had this initial judgment of them, encroaching on my space. So I think a compassion practice, of course, self-compassion, but that can be so hard to access for people. So maybe just a compassion practice in general is a huge leg up when it comes to approaching treatment as like, hey, it's a part of my life. I have OCD and I'm going to be treating the OCD. I would say it's as important as, practicing your exposures or doing your written homework or reading your books or whatever it is, approaching things from compassion. And another thing that comes to mind, I think, is also a sense of humor about yourself and others. Getting on board with saying, of course, when something that is so you happens, right? So like a trigger that would never happen to somebody else, but just happened to happen to you, and that's your thing, and it had to happen on the day you were, going to this important thing and whatever. Instead of going to this place of, suffering and self-hatred and wishing things were different, getting to this place of like, of course, this is the universe playing jokes on me, finding that place of humor. People with OCD, generally speaking, if they're not completely under the boot of depression, and even then, many of them still have incredible senses of humor because they have, in my opinion, quicker access to some of these, fringe thoughts that other people might not be thinking. So they say goofy things sometimes, that it makes them very funny. And you can use that to help, this process along of taking this part of the human condition that we call OCD and modifying it so that it's not the most prominent thing in your life.
Yeah, no, the self-compassion piece is so important. And, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is that just like consistent harshness. But I love the humor piece too. I think it was Dr. Jenicky at one of the conferences, or it might've been Alec Pollard, but they were saying it's really hard for the mind to be in both fear and humor at the same time. So humor is like a good tool to kind of get you out of it. And I used to use it all the time. Like I remember, it's like I would get, find something like contaminated and I'd throw it away. And I remember I was talking to my mom one time. I was just like really broken down. And I used to, use a Tide bottle once and then throw it away. And if you ever buy Tide, it's like $9-10, right? And I just remember like being just so frustrated. And I was like, and whoever owns Tide is literally sending their entire village to college on my dime because I keep buying the crappy product because I can't use it more than once. Yeah. And we just like had kind of a laugh, and then it helped sort of like center me. And then I was like, you know what? I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I know I have to use it a second time, and a third time it'll get easier. And it was like a reset for me. So I think humor can be a great space. And I always tell people, you're not laughing at your pain. You're just giving yourself a break from just the negativity and the harshness in your brain. That's really what humor can provide. So what I wanted to ask,
what I'll say, when you're doing that, you're also pointing out the absurdity of the situation. So that's creating mindfulness. It's positioning you as an observer of like, wow, look at this. I got this mud directly on my hands, and it's the thing I hate the most, right? And if you can approach that with a sense of humor, well, then your position is someone who is noticing something about it, as opposed to someone who's totally identified and stuck inside it and trying to get out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the other things I was talking to people about, like a successful support, is support. I've always found there wasn't enough research, obviously, when I was doing this presentation on OCD specific support groups, but there was a lot of research on like people going through cancer, for instance. Like if they're in a support group, they're more likely to show up to their chemo. They're more likely to do the things that they needed to do, and they found camaraderie. And I understand people can't always join a support group, but even if they have a family member or these kind of things online as support, why do you think for for the research and stuff, but just in general, is like, do you think support is something helpful for people going through OCD? Since I always feel like it is such a lone disorder if you get to your worst.
I think it's super helpful, again, because you can see yourself in other people. You can get feedback about how other people see you. You can recognize that you're not alone. The one sort of footnote I'll add to support is that sometimes the OCD goes after that in a way of making it seem like unless this person perfectly understands me or I perfectly understand them, then we can't relate. And that's an OCD quality where people kind of shut themselves off from others because, it's not good enough, right? It's not clean enough. It's like, yeah, I have OCD, you have OCD, but your OCD is this and my OCD is that. You can even have the same theme, but, you're more worried about chemicals and I'm more worried about, germs or something like that. And so the OCD is sort of creating distance between you instead of highlighting what you have in common. What you have in common isn't OCD. In any sense that, like, the support group for cancer is that's not what you have in common. It's suffering that you have in common, right? So understanding that you are in the presence of other people who know what it is to suffer, then it doesn't matter like what their kind of suffering is. Then you can relate. Then you can really remember that you're not alone. So the Buddhists talk about dukkha a lot. This idea of, it's translated many different ways, one of which is suffering or unsatisfactoriness. The best translation that I've heard recently was someone quoting Joseph Goldstein. He called it the inevitability of the unwanted, right? And I just love that the sound of that, the inevitability of the unwanted. So that's hard for us, right? We can be in a place where we feel good, okay, everything is clean, everything is safe, everything is understood, and then doubt arises, dirt arises, threats arise, and now we're in this other place, and we're wishing we weren't there, and we're frustrated because we thought it was going to last forever, and then we had another intrusive thought, and now we're back in the zone with the OCD. And if you can find other people who can speak that language, who can say like, yeah, this is what it's like to be a person, to realize the inevitability of the unwanted. I think it helps because, again, it gives you motivation for self-compassion. It gives you access to your sense of humor, and it violates this lie that the OCD tells you that that you're so different, that you're so unique. Like, there are things that are different and unique, but only if you're really being granular. If we were to zoom out, we'd see like you're just another person with another problem.
Yeah, I always tell people like OCD, because my clients will come and be like, I think I have a tumor, and I'm like, OCD does not have a medical degree. It has a PhD in lying, but it doesn't have a medical degree. And one of the things that it's really good at lying about is tearing apart your support system. Like you said, oh, this support group doesn't have anybody that has my exact type, or oh, I'm watching this live stream and they're not talking about my specific problem. Like OCD is always going to try to create distance between anything that's helpful, because then it gets to stick around, it gets to stay relevant. Yeah. Another thing I was talking about to people, and I'd love to get your take on this, is there was a research out of UK that I was reading about. It was more of qualitative research, but it was talking to people about like what brought them into treatment. And the number one reason that brought them into getting better was they had hit rock bottom. And so a lot of people at this talk that I was doing were saying like, I wish I would have gotten treatment 7 years ago, but it wasn't until I hit rock bottom. So somebody watching this who hasn't hit rock bottom yet, because I agree, I hit rock bottom. That's what compelled me to get help, right? And to reach out. So for the people that aren't at that rock bottom space, how do you think someone can get to treatment without having to force themselves to going to the depths of OCD? Because I think that, obviously getting to treatment is what people need to do, but how do people find that drive if they're not at their worst yet and they're still able to like hold things together?
I think that what causes people to fall for this illusion of I'll go when I have to, or like there's a rock bottom and then I'll be forced to go. There's a couple of things going on there. One is there might be a lot of shame around asking for help. But if you ask for help in a condition where any basic observer would be like, yeah, you need help, well, then there's a little bit less shame in that than, you kind of look to others like you're functioning, but you're going to talk to somebody about your problems like some kind of a whiner, right? Like people want to avoid that situation. So that's obviously a confusion, right? Like you don't need to prove to everybody that you can't function at all to ask for help. And then there's an OCD quality to that, right? This sort of black and white, all or nothing, like I'm completely dysfunctional, so then I can ask for help, as opposed to I'm terribly impaired. Well, that's not good enough. I don't deserve to ask for help. So I think that's one part of it. And I think the other part of it is also that people who are really struggling, they think the OCD kind of presents them with this lie that they can maintain it. I think this is the biggest lie, is that that there is a way to get along with the OCD, that you can make it copacetic. You can make it so that I'll do these compulsions and I'll follow these rules. And as long as I do these compulsions and follow these rules, the OCD will agree to these terms, right? And so it's exactly the metaphor we say, don't negotiate with terrorists. It's for this reason, right? Or you give me these, this, and I'll give you that, and then we're going to somehow like get along, understanding that there's been this even trade. But the nature of the disorder is to get worse. It has to, right? So it's, you figured out that the best way to deal with this is to do this compulsion, and then when you do it, you feel great, you feel free, your compulsion is done, and then the next time you have to do it like a little bit more with a slightly different attitude, but you might not even notice that you've added to it, that the OCD has asked for a little bit more. You don't notice it in the day-to-day. You notice it a week later or a month later or a year later, when something that used to take you 20 minutes of ritualizing now requires several hours of ritualizing. And it's all because you were thinking you got this under control, because you were tricked into thinking that there is such a thing as your OCD being controlled. No, your OCD can be treated and managed, but not through negotiation. It's not because you figured out a way to perfect your rituals so that they don't take up so much time. That's a trick. And that's why I think a lot of people wait until it's like right in their face that now they're spending 8 hours trapped in the bathroom, or they're ruminating 24 hours a day and they're not sleeping, and somebody begs them to go get help because they were like, yeah, but I think I can, if I can just do it this way, I can kind of keep it in the zone where like I'm impaired, but I have OCD, so I'm not really supposed to have like a great life. I'm supposed to have like an okay life because I have OCD. I disagree with all of that. I understand it comes naturally, but I disagree with all of that. There is no managing, there is no coming to terms with the OCD. It's only treating it or being owned by it.
I'm glad that you said that, because I see that a lot in clients with perfectionism. They might have been very successful in like middle school, maybe high school, maybe even like the first year or so in college, because they did balance it out. But like you're saying, it's never going to just like halt. It's always going to demand more and more. And then they get to a point where they're in college, they have a job, and everything's falling apart. And they're like, if I can only just get back to how I was in high school. And I tell them, you can't. It's already been open. The dam's broken. It's either treatment or you're going to continue to experience these symptoms at a larger scale. There is no such thing as like kind of stuffing the feathers back into the pillow. Like once it's out, it's either treatment or you're going to keep sliding. There's not this like, oh, I can just get back to when the OCD was slightly useful. Liz, welcome.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, guys. Sorry. So good to see y'all. I love this.
Yeah, what we were kind of talking about is like some of the different things that we see in our own practices of clients that are successful. And one of the things I was bringing up is, there was a research article I was sharing with this talk that I did last week out of the UK, where the number one reason that most people with OCD get into treatment is they kind of hit a rock bottom. And so people were asking, like, how do you find the courage or the motivation to get into treatment if you're able to sort of still manage it? It's not that bad yet. And so that's what we're just kind of tuning into. But one thing maybe I'd love to propose to both of you is the other thing that I think I see with clients. You were talking about this, John. They like factor in that triggers are going to happen. They factor in that anxiety is going to happen, because sometimes there's clients that come in here and they want to figure out, how can I live with like no anxiety, and that's where the compulsions come. And they want to come into treatment and say, I don't want to face anything scary. I think even if you take a more cognitive approach, more behavioral approach, at the end of the day, change is challenging. Change is going to bring up a lot, and it's difficult. Growth is always going to be more difficult than being sedentary. So how do both of you have those conversations with clients like, hey, recovery can bring up some emotions and can be challenging, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's not working. The growth is happening, and it's actually a good thing if you're starting to find yourself experience some of those emotions, because it means that you're making a shift.
Yeah, I think it's a Great question. And it's one that, I love, John. I wrote down your statement a second ago that your OCD can be treated and managed, but not controlled. Because I think that it is this hard piece that a lot of people do think that they have control or that they can control their OCD to a degree. And so they feel like I'm just going to try that and see what happens. And, or, okay, it's controlled enough, so I don't need treatment. But when it becomes a little bit under control, like when it needs more control, then I'll go to treatment and I get enough treatment to control it. But that's actually just prolonging living and suffering with OCD. And I think that the piece we need people to hear is that your OCD can be treated. Your OCD can be fully managed. It doesn't have to just be controlled enough for you to be able to function. And the thing I always say is that you actually have to make that choice. I think, Chris, a lot of people ask me, like, how do I motivate people? How do I motivate myself? What does that look like? And the thing I always say is that, like, that has to come from you. You have to make the choice that you don't want to live like this anymore, that you're tired of trying to control your OCD, of trying to be functional enough despite having this disorder, and that you want to have freedom from it. You want things to look totally different.
I used to spend years of my life pretending to be happy when I was actually quite miserable. And I would tell people, like, hey, I have OCD, so I have to do things this way. Like, so OCD became kind of like, something I was partnered with that, people just needed to understand. And it wasn't in this sort of like, and you have to follow these rules or you have to do things, but it's sort of like, please be patient with me because, I have OCD, so I have to do things this way. And I got kind of used to living that way, thinking this was about as good as it was going to get. And, I wasn't, being like truly liberated wasn't really in the cards for me. And, then that changed, and then I got kind of reinvested in treatment, and that changed. I realized that whole idea of like, because I have OCD, therefore this is how I have to live my life, then kind of resigning to it. It's really tragic. I find a lot of people kind of stuck in that illusion, and it's so amazing when you see them break out of that illusion. Yeah, it's hard. It's a chronic condition. You're constantly, you're always building skills, and you're always learning how to develop mastery over it. But it's not okay. Well, you're just this way, so this is just what life has to look like.
I think one of the most insidious things OCD does is it convinces people that OCD is a personality trait. So what I mean by that is, like, all of clients that are very extroverted, but they'll be sitting in class and they'll have an obsession that they might like say something out loud that's very like hurtful. They might just blurt out like a derogatory term. So they sit in class and they don't talk. And they might not even really interact with people because of that fear. And they go their whole high school experience not going to proms, not going to dances or football games, not raising their hands, not making friends. And like, as they get treatment, they'll start off and they're like, oh, I'm an introverted person, which is fine if you are, right? But as they get better and they start to get more outgoing, I'm like, okay, the person that you're becoming as you're getting better is way different than who you walked in the door. And then they do, like, at the end, there's a little bit of sadness because they're just like, man, I spent my whole high school career thinking I was this introverted, quiet person because I got reinforced that it was right, but that's not me. And so I agree with you, John. I think when all three of us with our own recovery decided, like, hey, I'm tired of putting on a facade. I'm tired of like going through the motions and thinking I have to do these things because I'm different than everyone else. When I finally like treated it like the disorder it was, separated myself from it, that's when the recovery really happened.
Totally. No, it's interesting. It's like, I don't know about you guys, but people always ask me, like, what was my aha moment? And like, do I have that? What does that look like? And I always say, like, I don't have one. Like, I wish I could tell you there was this one moment in time, or there was this one, like, but I don't have that. It was kind of like over time, I slowly started to realize, like, oh, the hold OCD has on me is actually a choice, and that I can choose to fully let go versus just figuring out how to survive with bad OCD. And I just kind of had to make that cognitive shift and do it. It wasn't necessarily like this one thing happened or this one situation occurred and it all of a sudden was the click for me. But I will say, when I let go, that became my aha moment of like, oh, like I was actually making treatment so much harder than it needed to be.
Yeah, I don't have this grandiose story either. I mean, the closest I have to a story is like, I remember I was watching a show and it was a making of the video with Justin Timberlake. And I don't want to be obviously a musician or a dancer, but at that point I had been like away from people, around my peers for like 6 years. And I remember seeing it and thinking like, here's this person doing what he wants. And meanwhile, I'm about to go do 2 hours of shower rituals. And for me, it was just getting fed up. That's how I have to simplify it when parents are asking me like, what was it for you? And I was like, you just got to get fed up. Like once I got to a point where I was like, I don't think I want to wash my hands, for hours upon the day. Like you just get fed up and have that click. Do you, like for you all, like I think one of the things that helps people have that shift that you talked about, Liz, is I like when I see a client come in and they're like, hey, I know we talked about doing that next week, but I was at home and just said, I'm done. Like I just did it on my own and it was great. That's when I start to see that click, is when there's that initiation where I don't feel like I'm the driver anymore. Like they've sort of swapped roles with me. Do you guys see that in your own practice?
Yeah, definitely. I see that, and I see sometimes the moment where somebody stops waiting for permission to change, and they just kind of, like, fine, I'll try it this way, right? Or, like so they'll come back and, I stopped doing this ritual, or I stopped engaging this behavior, I did exposure to this. And I'd say, why? And they're like, well, you told me not to worry about it. So, like I just decided, maybe I'll do, I've tried it my way, right? I often tell patients, it's always the thing you haven't tried that works, right? So it's, they've been trying it their way the whole time. They decided to try it my way, not my way, like I take ownership of it, but I presented them with an option, and they were like, I can't do this, and then one day they're like, yeah, right. I always find those moments to be really awe-inspiring.
I also have a conversation with clients because sometimes they'll just say, Chris, the treatment sounds so exhausting. And because they've gotten so used to living the way that OCD has them live, that's when I take a step back and I go, let's look at what a lifestyle with OCD has cost you. I'll even sometimes do like an OCD timeline where we'll kind of go through it. And when it's, I have a whiteboard, and when they see it up there, I was going to say black and white, but I always like to use the blue pen. It's prettier. So when I have it in blue and white, the client's always sitting there like, oh my goodness, I have put and dedicated so much time. And I say, what do you have to show for it? Like, what can you give me? And most of the time they'll have that moment where they're like, no, it's giving me nothing. And every once in a while, if somebody says like, well, I didn't get AIDS or I didn't get cancer, I say, how come there's people out there that don't have AIDS that didn't even do 1/99th of what you've done, right? So as soon as people can kind of get to that moment of they recognize that all the work they've been giving into OCD, it's kind of been busy work that they've thrown a black hole and have nothing to show for it. I think getting fed up, but also kind of stop looking at OCD as like an asset, a companion, a friend, and starting to look at it the mental health disorder that it is. I see that as kind of like momentum forward as well. For some reason, sometimes people think OCD is like an asset or a gift, and it really isn't. I want to throw some questions up there. If you could put up at 12:33 for John or Liz, Jay Mystic Brennan asks, what should I do if I'm having demonic or blasphemous intrusive thoughts and images? So a lot of times we hear like obsessions, or people have like certain fears, but sometimes people get just like images or just thoughts and stuff. So if somebody comes into either of your treatment center and are experiencing these thoughts, what is the way that they could address those in a treatment way?
I'll take a swing at it, or I'll start it off. Liz, you can finish it. The first thing you want to find out is, how does a person relate to this specific content? It could be a part of their religion that they really believe in, that has a specific meaning to them, or it could not be a part of their religion, but it's this doubt, this what if, and so those are very different relationships. They could both be OCD, but I think it's important to understand the cultural context when somebody's talking about something like demonic or blasphemous thoughts, because you can't just like lead with like, well, that's all nonsense, and just disregard it, because it might not be all nonsense to the other person. But whether it's nonsensical or not is separate from the fact that what we're talking about are mental objects, in this case images, that are presenting in the mind space, and they're presenting alongside all the other things that could present. So your emotions, your physical sensations, everything you can see and hear. And the OCD is telling you that you have a moral imperative to pay all of your attention to that one aspect of your experience instead of taking in the whole experience. And that's at the crux of OCD, which is like, until I've removed the threat, which is this mental image, I'm not a person. I can't function. I can't be in the world. So one of the things I would recommend for this person asking the question is to consider, before you do any, worry about exposure, and maybe it means I'm condemned or I'm in league with the devil or whatever. Before you get into all the narrative around it, can you just start from the objective reality, which is an image has appeared, and just be with that. And that can sometimes be the bulk of the exposure, is just calling it what it is. An image has appeared. Okay. Right? Is it going to be there forever? Is it, do we know for a fact that you have to do something about it? Or is it like everything else, totally unreliable? It's going to come and go, however it wants. So that's where I would start from a mindfulness perspective of, there is an image. The question is, what do I do about the intrusive thoughts? The implication being that thoughts in and of themselves are a problem, that when they intrude, there's something we're supposed to do about them. I think that gets us off on the wrong foot, which is like, okay, they're here, right? And then the next question is like, what would be healthy? What would be self-compassionate? What would be wise in terms of how we want to respond to them? Then we can get into discussions about any kind of surrounding thoughts and reactions you have about your analysis of the situation, the narrative around it. And, this means I'm a bad person or something like that. Okay, or this means I'm in trouble. And then we can talk about exposure strategies, which would include just practicing creating conditions where those thoughts are more likely to arise, so that you can train yourself to be less reactive to them. And I don't mean train yourself to be non-reactive to them, because again, they might have meaning to you, but there's nothing special about blasphemous and demonic thoughts. Everybody in one form or another experiences them, but how they relate to them is where we see all the variation. So you can get into all sorts of things, putting pictures up of things that are triggering or reading triggering things. That's really case dependent. But that's my initial take. I'm curious what Liz has to say.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'd like to know a lot more about the question, but the big thing for us is, how do we make sure that we're going to face these fears, but do it in a way that's values-based, And I think that one of the things I find a lot of times with these kind of like demonic fears or fears around religion or scrupulosity is this fear that, oh, well, I wouldn't do that, And so I'll give an example, but, I might say, for an exposure, would you be willing to wear a devil costume? And someone might say, no, like that's against my values. I'm not willing to wear it. And I'll say, okay, well then, would you be willing to go to a costume shop and touch the devil costume, but then touch other stuff and maybe buy something else? And they're like, well, I don't know. Maybe that goes against my values too. And I'm like, well, does it? Because if you didn't have OCD, would you let your kid go to a costume shop during Halloween and pick out a costume, and knowing that it maybe was touched by other stuff? And if they're like, no, I don't think I could do that, but I know I need to, it's like, okay, well then that's the reason why we need to go do that work. And so how do we make sure that we're not asking you to do things that don't align with your values, but we're also not overusing, like, oh, that's against my values, as a way to not have to do tough exposure? So I always want to ask, like, is this really not values-based, or is this avoidance? But how can we make the same trigger values-based? So I bet if you have OCD, you can find a way that same exact thing is going to feel just as triggering, but it's going to be values-based. And so I need you to tell me what that is and to guide and direct that, versus kind of like using it as a way that I can't do that work at all. But, ERP doesn't really look different. I think so many people think that a certain type of OCD or certain triggers or certain fears mean that ERP looks different. No, it should actually all look the same. We should make sure we're getting you closer to living a life where OCD makes no decisions for you, and that we're facing your fears, but we're doing it in a way that aligns with your values.
Well said. I really like this question. I'm excited to hear what you guys think, because I think it's so relevant for right now. So Brennan, at 12:24 your time, Chantel asks, I've been doing pretty good with my recovery lately, but now with Christmas around the corner, it seems like I'm taking steps backwards. I'm hosting both families on 2 different days, and I'm feeling OCD creep in. I had trouble sleeping and I'm feeling anxious. Is this normal in recovery? So I'll make it a little 2-part. Like right now with holidays and stuff, do you see that people are having a little bit of an upswing? And then second, how do people address this? Because I think a lot of times when people are doing good in recovery, if there's a change, they're moving, they're going back to school, they're getting married, we might see an upswing in symptoms. How do you manage that without completely freaking out that you're falling all the way back to start?
It's such a great question. And I'll tell you, like, number one, yes, this is normal, right? We know that when vulnerabilities are increased, OCD and anxiety also might increase, or it's going to try to attack you. I can tell you myself, I've been feeling more anxious overall the past couple days, just because, like, holidays are coming in, I'm hosting in-laws, I'm going to Austin, I've got a lot to do, and I've been feeling my, like, general anxiety, my baseline level of anxiety is higher. Now, for me, what that means is that there is a chance OCD thoughts are going to be stickier, a little bit harder if they come up to not respond to, but I still have that total choice to respond or not. But give yourself grace. So first of all, just recognize that like this is a stressful time. Like we all know that holidays are stressful. You're hosting two people at your own house. There's a lot to do. There's a lot on your to-do list. This is the perfect time for OCD to try to creep in and to try to capitalize on that. It's your job to make sure that it can be stressful. You can feel that, you can be in that, and you cannot let OCD capitalize, right? By still choosing to like let the stress be there and moving through it. But recognizing that like, okay, it's there. I'm feeling a little bit more vulnerable today. So I'm going to do a little bit extra self-care. I'm going to do a little bit longer mindfulness, or I'm going to go on a longer walk, or I'm going to do these things that will help ground me a little bit. Well, I know I'm going to have some extra anxiety in this moment.
Yeah. Yeah, all right. First thing, go to Etsy and look up trophies, and then design yourself a trophy that says, greatest family member of all time. And hopefully that'll arrive before Christmas, put up somewhere so that you can look at it. 2 families in 2 days. That's all I've been thinking about since the question came up. I mean, that is impressive. That deserves a trophy. And that's the attitude that you want to have about it as well. Not like you're a martyr or anything, but from the perspective of it's going to be very stimulating, often overstimulating. It's going to be there's going to be a lot of joy, but there's going to be a lot of button pushing and triggers. The most functional, loving families still press each other's buttons, right? So there's things that are going to set you off. For compassion, self-compassion for the win, right? Everything that happens. You want to start with self-compassion. If you forget, the easiest way to remember is just put your hand right here before you do anything, right? Your mother says something, your in-law says something. Before you react, take a breath, put your hand on your heart. And then the challenge here is to find that balance between healthy distancing, right? Which is sort of positioning yourself as an observer. This person is pressing my buttons, I can see that. And like unhelpful avoidance, not letting yourself be with what's arising there, because what's arising there is still useful. It's all useful. What comes up? Notice the tension that arises. Notice the reactivity. Notice the urge to engage or disengage, and really keep practicing that. I really like kind of mental noting in a very gentle way, right? I'm judging, I'm comparing, I'm doubting. Maybe you don't think that you didn't make the cookies the right way or something like that, right? And doubts arising. And okay, so let that doubt arise. So you're kind of swimming through these shark-infested waters, but they're not really sharks. They look like sharks. They're really shark plushies, squishy, fuzzy sharks, and that's how you want to relate to them. And if all else fails, the people who are the most frustrating for you, I find it helpful to picture them like Muppets, because you can't take anybody seriously when they're doing that. In terms of the OCD and the intensity around that, right? Because your OCD is going to come in and be like, hey, this is very, very stressful. Let me help you out by giving you something completely useless to do, like rituals. You try not to take the bait, but you're going to be more compulsive, and you have to also be okay with that, right? You're gonna sometimes. I don't mean that to say like, yeah, go ahead and do as many compulsions as you want. I mean, notice when you've gotten kind of wrapped up in the OCD. Don't judge yourself for that. That's inevitable, and say like, okay, well, that was a little rugged, and then step back in to a more mindful space. And it'll happen over and again. And that's the trick, is to kind of maintain the self-compassion throughout. If you want to give yourself a head start, of course, might recommend kind of boosting up some of your exposure practice before this happens. Get really good at pushing the OCD, further away, so when it comes closer, it's not already starting here, it's starting from over here. So you're like a little bit more obsessive compulsive, and you can still manage that because you've really worked yourself into a very healthy spot. Sort of pre-gaming with your ERP.
I like that, pre-gaming.
I like it.
What is it that they have outside of football game? Tailgating. Like pre-gaming, and then you can do like the tailgate, right? Like do your tailgate before the family comes.
Exactly.
I wanted to throw this question out real quick. I know we're getting at time, but think from Twitch. So shout out to watching us on Twitch. What are some important points about treating children with OCD? So that was at 12:20. I'll throw something out there and love to hear your opinions. I was thinking about it when I saw that question. I would say like the 2 most successful cases with kids is one kid was really into Harry Potter and one kid was really into Batman. And like we made the world of fighting OCD that world. So like for the Harry Potter one, she wanted to be Hermione, I was Harry Potter. And then in the Batman one, he was Batman and I was Robin, even though I'm like way taller than him because he was a kid. I'm like, okay, I don't see how that works. But like every day we'd go out and challenge it. We would play that, right? Like the fear for the kid with Batman, his was about touching animals or kids younger, his intellect will go down. So like we would go to like an animal shelter and we'd like pet dogs, but we would call them like the Joker's hyenas, and we'd go and we'd like challenge, and if we could pet 10 dogs, like we'd win that battle. So I think for kids, I was fortunate enough to watch when we were sponsoring one of the BTTIs, Aureen Wagner, present. I think she does masterful work with children, but it's like making it in a language and a world that they understand and they see value in. That would be like my kind of 2 cents on this question. Any other things you want to throw in there about OCD with kids?
I mean, for me, I agree. The biggest change or difference is language. I think everything else is works out, but I think that language is something we have to be really, really thoughtful about and use effectively. Kids aren't going to understand when we're, sometimes they're brilliant and they understand more than we do, but sometimes we just have to be thoughtful about language and the way we explain things and understand it. But gamifying, I think, works for most adults. And so I think it also works really well for kids, right? Is how can we make this fun and make it a game and make it exciting and make you feel really like this, like so courageous after you do this work, and really be able to empower what you just did versus like, oh yeah, you did a good job, like, and assuming that you'll be proud of yourself. Like, how can we make sure the hard work is really, really rewarded?
Absolutely.
Kids are smarter than us. They haven't unlearned all the important lessons from childhood that we gradually unlearn as we careen into adulthood. So they have an edge. So I think, yes, you start by finding what it is that you can relate to. Might be a kind of music or a video game or a movie or something like that, and you connect on that level so that you can be trusted. And then it's really about providing them with a sense that you're not here like they're not at school. You're not here to sort of tell them what to do, right? This is a collaboration. You're here to learn from them. How you come to me with this problem? You seem like a smart kid. How are we going to solve this problem? I have some ideas. What are your ideas? I think Batman would probably solve it this way and Harry Potter would solve it that way. But, let's start from there. So that you really have it. We do this with adults too, but I think it's even more so with children. There's an instinct to sort of tell them what to do and how to do it and teach them, but you don't know that much more than they do. It's really more about aligning with them and opening them up to maybe there's another way to address this challenge that you're having. And I also agree, gamifying it, making it fun for both of you. I think it's important you both find it fun. I think that those are the hardest cases where like neither of you are having a good time.
Especially for the kids, right? You want to have something out there. Well, we have other questions that I always tell everybody this. If we didn't get to your question, I promise we copy and pasted them. We have a big document of questions that don't get answered. I think it's due time for Liz and I to do a pre-recorded mailbag and answer some questions. But please, yeah, it's beyond time, right? But please trust. You asked a question that we didn't get to. I put it in there. I don't miss them. I go through. So we'll definitely get to that. But I want to do final thoughts. So we'll start with you, John. You're our guest. Any final thoughts? I was telling John, Liz, he's our final guest for 2023. So yay.
What a great final guest.
Yeah. So what are some final thoughts as people kind of finish off this year, head to the next year? What are some final thoughts to kind of motivate people, or anything you want to leave people with?
Well, first, thank you to you guys. I mean, this product, this thing that you create for people is such an amazing resource, and I'm just always so honored to be a part of it. This is a very, very happy place for me to be. So thank you for having me on. I'll leave you with this. I had talked to Liz about this before, so I just got back from this meditation retreat, and on the retreat, you have a yogi job. It's the whole point is you're practicing mindfulness all day, sitting, walking, eating, and then you have these little chores. And the whole point is to practice that mindfully as well, to be present with what comes up when you're doing it. So my chore this time was helping in preparing the salad for the next day. So I'm in the kitchen. I've got two other yogis who, one person, his job is to cut it. Another person, my job is to rinse it and spin it and wash it. And then the next person's job is to dry it, put it in a bucket, and then they put it in the salad for the next day. So I'm doing this job and I'm thinking, this is kind of stupid. It's kind of boring. It's not as cool as like other yogi jobs I've had. It's cold water and lettuce. It's not all that interesting, but I'm trying to have a mindful attitude about it. I'm trying to remember, hey, that's comparing and that's judging, and just be with the moment, be with the cold water, be with the green of the lettuce and the rest of that. And so the first night, we did this practice. I didn't think anything of it. So then the next day lunch comes around and I'm standing there in the lunch line and I'm thinking about how it's going. I'm frustrated. My back is hurting from all the sitting, and maybe this wasn't a good idea. And I've got 4 more days to go. And what about work and all of this stuff? I'm in my head about a lot of things, and I'm moving forward in the line. And then I get to this giant bowl full of lettuce, and immediately what arises is, that's my lettuce. That's the famous lettuce. This is the lettuce that I'm in relation to, that I have a connection to. I held it in my hands, in my gloved hands, and the point of that story is that it was a complete shock to me to notice it, to see it, because I was in my head ruminating, thinking, analyzing, judging, and then suddenly it was like quantum leap, like, whoosh, oh boy, like here I am in front of this experience that's real and joyful and exciting. I'm going to make this incredible salad and it's going to be good. And I know it's not going to last because I'm going to eat it, but I'm going to be with this in this moment. The moral of that story is, when you're really paying attention, there's always a lot of good things that are happening, that are a part of you, that are part of your personality, a part of your family, a part of the holidays, a part of, your experience. And when you're kind of immersed or held hostage by the OCD, it's this constant work. It's this constant, like, please just give me a little bit of relief. I'll do this compulsion. Just give me a little bit of relief. And while you're working on that project, all of the good things, the little things in your life are passing you by, and you're not there.
Yeah.
You're not there. You're off in OCD land. You're missing them, and you think life is miserable because you're not actually there for life, because you're off in OCD land. So whatever your approach is, whatever treatment you're in, however it is that you're working on your OCD, whatever it takes to learn how to get out of that story, how to escape from that contract that you have with your OCD that says, well, because this image or this thought arises, now I have to do this thing. Remember, there's a huge payoff. It's not always immediate, but there is this huge payoff that the more present you are, the more really cool things are happening, including things you didn't know were cool, like, hey man, look at that lettuce. So that's my end of the year message for you.
I'm going to think about you now when I have my Greek salad at Christmas.
What kind of salad, Chris?
A Greek salad, which, Liz, I'm going to invite you over just so you can see why I love being Greek.
Everybody knows I make fun of Chris because, like, he has to bring up that he's Greek at least 1 to 5 times every webinar or every event or every. And I'm like, Chris, we all know you're Greek. Like, it's my Greek food, my Greek family. I'm Greek. Okay.
Yeah.
But I love you, Chris. So no, my ending message is just such a message of gratitude. Like, I'm so grateful and blown away by this community. And I tell people, and I mean it when I say it, that I really do think the OCD world has the greatest community in the world. And when I get to be with patients, when I get to be with you all, when I get to be at the conference, like, it is never a chore. It is truly something that I have so much gratitude for and so much honor, that it just, y'all are incredible. You hold each other up. You guys, just looking at the comment section, right? Like, there's so much motivation and I just love you guys. I'm grateful for you guys. It's an incredible community, and I'm honored to be able to be in a space where I can share experiences. And I hope that as you go into 2024, you're able to have a perspective shift that it is not about controlling your OCD. It's about being able to get freedom from it, and that is possible with effective treatment as long as we quit negotiating with it.
Well said. A couple quick logistics. Somebody asked for a whole webinar on mindfulness. I want you back, John. So we'll talk about that in our meetings. We'd love to have you back on that. We will not be having a live stream at this time next Wednesday. Everybody at the IOCF is taking a much needed break for the holidays, but we will be back the following Wednesday at 12 Eastern. So just remember, not next Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that. And somebody asked about, dealing with depression. please come to that live stream. We're actually talking about depression and how depression can also impact your OCD treatment with Stephanie Woodrow, a licensed therapist who's with the ADAA, so the Anxiety Disorder Association of America. So please join us back here live January 3rd at 12 Eastern. And then lastly, some people were really struggling to find care. Always go to iocdf.org/find-help. And remember, if there's a clinician in your area that looks good but has a wait list, ask them if they have any recommendations. You can't find someone on the list. And my final thought is I want to throw a big thank you to John for obviously being our guest and kind of kicking off the last one of the year. And then a special thank to Liz, because I get to see her every Wednesday. I think she's such an asset to this community. And all three of us are people that got fed up with OCD and wanted to go and live our authentic lives. And we put in the work, and that's why we're here with you. So please, please, please know that you can get better too. But Liz, say your final last line to take us out.
Happy holidays, lean in. It's going to be tough. Holidays are tough, right? There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, but you can do it. And I'm so excited to see you in the new year, to hear about your goals, and to watch you guys keep growing, keep thriving, and continue to support each other. Happy holidays.
Bye, everyone.